This episode of Crosscut Talks is supported by Alaska Airlines.
Hey, welcome to Crosscut Talks. I'm Mark Baumgarten, the managing editor at Crosscut, and this week we're talking about journalism, which happens to be one of my favorite things to talk about. I should qualify that statement. I don't think that every conversation about journalism is worth having. I generally avoid the media critique, and I use that word lightly, that fills my social media feeds. I don't care about the stupid thing that whatever anchor for whatever partisan cable outlet said, which I guess, word for word, is probably most of the conversations happening about journalism right now. But talking heads are going to pop off. That's their job. The conversations I'm interested in, though, are the ones that are a little less scripted. The ones that explore the unvarnished truths of an evolving and forever uneasy industry. These are conversations about change. And for the 2 decades of my career, that change has mostly been the bad kind. Shrinking column inches, shrinking newsrooms, and editor after editor asking how we can do more with less. Come to think of it, talking about journalism really wasn't all that fun for a while. But things have changed some in the last few years. My news editor, Donna Blankenship, likes to remark that she sees more promise in journalism now than ever. Doomsayers are still skulking around, but there is a lot to be hopeful about. And a lot of that hope is embodied in the 19th, a nonprofit newsroom that's focused on covering gender, politics, and policy. If you haven't heard of the 19th yet, that isn't necessarily a surprise. In the long history of American journalism, it's barely out of the gate. Most of us can't remember what we covered before the pandemic, but for the 19th, there was no before the pandemic. It was launched in the midst of upheaval. And it is, in its approach to journalism, a kind of upheaval. At the center is a question. Who gets to tell our nation's stories? To find out how the 19th answers that question, we invited founders Amanda Zamora and Emily Ramshaw to the Crosscut Festival this past May, where they spoke with Crosscut Now host Starla Sampaco about the origins and intentions of their brave new media outlet. This conversation is sponsored by the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication, which would like to share this message. True to the legacy of its namesake, the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication is dedicated to providing students, the communications professionals of the future, inspiration, experience, and real-world education. The Edward R. Murrow College of Communication is a proud sponsor of the Crosscut Festival. I hope you enjoy the conversation. If you have any feedback, please send it to talks@crosscut.com. Okay, on with the show.
Amanda, Emily, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I'm really excited to chat with you two today, and I wanted to start by asking if there was a particular moment in either of your careers that sparked your idea for the 19th and made you think, we need to have better reporting on gender, politics, and policy.
Sure. I mean, I'll jump in there. I think it really started for me about 5 years ago when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in the 2016 election. I was on maternity leave with a baby girl, and we'd been reading so many headlines around, women and electability, women and likability that just sort of felt so fundamentally sexist in nature. And I think in that moment, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a new national newsroom of record that centered the experiences, in particular of women? And so that was sort of the kernel of the idea. I was raising a little girl, and it was a hard time to think about doing something new. But 4 years later, Amanda and I really put our heads together. We had, more women than ever on the 2020 stage, more women of color on the 2020 stage. And that really was the impetus for us to say, this is the moment to take the leap.
Right. Thank you, Emily. Well, I know that as a female-forward organization, the 19th aims to cover politics and policy through a gender lens. I'd love to unpack that. What does that mean? Amanda, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, we're obviously looking at women being the majority of the American electorate, and at a very basic level, we were interested in centering women's voices in all of their nuance and complexity, not treating, that voting block as a monolith, but really trying to get at, the diversity of the lived experience of this nation's women, whether they are, caretakers of children in school or taking care of older parents in the workforce, out of the workforce, women living in suburban areas, off the coasts and rural areas. So that's where we started. And I think one of the things that we quickly realized as we were forming this team is that there are plenty of other people who are marginalized on the basis of their gender, who are not women. And we have been learning a lot and really committed to covering the LGBTQ community and centering those voices as well, and trying to understand, all of the ways in which trans folks and LGBTQ folks are still marginalized, where they don't have, equal access to civil rights or the healthcare system, or are dealing with voter suppression. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of it in a nutshell. That's where we started, and we've definitely expanded our focus beyond that in the year since, almost a year since we launched.
Wow. And I appreciate that you mentioned that we are not a monolith. And I think it's interesting for the folks who are viewing, if you look at the way the 19th is spelled, there's actually an asterisk at the end. And that asterisk is meant to be a visible reminder of those who've been omitted by our democracy, because the 19th Amendment really only gave white women the right to vote. In practice, many women of color were excluded. So I'd love to go off of what you were just talking about, Amanda, about what specifically the 19th is doing to ensure that the voices of women of color and folks of color are being elevated in your work.
I think it all really starts with the reporting. First of all, we hired a diverse newsroom of people to examine, gender and politics and policy. We've got staff now in, I think, 10 states in total. We've got people from different backgrounds and lived experiences. And the first thing that we say is that we expect and we appreciate those lived experiences. We expect you to bring them with you to work. I think that's a point of departure from a lot of, the kind of, even the training that I had as a reporter. You're sort of expected to kind of, adopt this sort of very neutral, objective process of reporting that, compartmentalizes who you are as a person. And what we're saying is, no, we feel like we can do our best journalism by, yes, applying all of those great standards of journalistic rigor, but also leaning into who people are and what they bring in terms of the way that they see the world. So I think that translates into reporting that centers the people that we're striving to cover, that diverse electorate, whether it's race or geography or socioeconomic or gender identity, and continuing to be committed to building a diverse team that lets us, expand those lenses in meaningful ways. Emily, is there anything I'm missing there?
Nope, that was exactly perfect.
I think it's interesting that you brought up, that training that a lot of us got, that we're expected to be neutral. And it's something that I've struggled with a lot, especially as, a woman of color, a Filipino American. And there's this expectation from some folks that in order to be a good journalist, you must be free of bias, whatever that means. And you can't really, we have to be very careful about bringing our identities into our work. How do you navigate that as journalists, either as the leaders of your own newsroom now, or even when you were working in newsrooms like the Texas Tribune? How did you navigate that?
I mean, I would just say this has been a journey, and look, like it's no surprise to any of you, I'm sitting here as a white woman of privilege in this space, and I received the same kind of journalism training that I think a lot of us did, which is, making sure we're talking to both sides and making sure we're presenting everybody's argument. When at the end of the day, the reality is some people are peddling truths and some people are peddling lies and misinformation. And I think, we made, beyond the pivot to increasingly cover the LGBTQ community, which we talked about, Amanda talked about a minute ago. The other thing we did this year is decide that we are pivoting from this label of a nonpartisan newsroom to an independent newsroom, with the idea being that, we want to have the flexibility to say, We stand for gender equity, we stand for racial justice, we stand for human rights. And at the end of the day, we peddle facts, and we peddle science, and we peddle accurate information. And there aren't both sides to every story when you're dealing with that, with those arenas and the issues that we cover. So I think that's been an important pivot for us, and I think one that you're going to see even more newsrooms emulating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How has your audience been, reacting to that decision to not peddle that whole both sides-ism?
We just got incredible response. I mean, I think one thing that's been fantastic is that we heard from, after we made that pivot, we heard from a lot of folks who are really exceedingly excited about that progression for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Well, I do know that a lot of your content from the 19th is geared towards empowering women, people of color, and folks who are LGBTQ. But I'm curious, how do we get straight white men to care about these issues and to look at them through a gender lens? I ask that because often straight white men are still the gatekeepers to a lot of opportunities that affect people of color or even the decision makers. How do we get them to look at things through a gender lens?
I mean, the two ways that come to mind are that we're covering them. So Amanda Becker did tremendous cover of the Lincoln Project, the Never Trump organization that was really working in the last campaign cycle to try to make sure that he was not reelected. And she was really examining how women should have been key to their messaging if they were really trying to swing Republican voters or sway them away from Trump, and pointing out that a lot of their campaign or their tactics and strategies were not inclusive of women. So I think there's that the journalism always allows us, I think, to kind of examine the gender dynamics of power. But then also, frankly, I think just by creating more journalism and making sure that for every conversation and every story that the mainstream media is covering, that we've got a 19th version that really is centering gender and racial equity in our headlines, so that when you're stacking them all up, I think that one of these things is not like the other approach. We want more of that until we can hopefully, nudge or influence, mainstream media, frankly, to pay more attention to how they're framing these stories.
Yeah. Emily, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that it's been really a special journey to be doing this with somebody like Amanda, who is so devoted to the audience. I mean, I think I went into this as sort of, a politics hound, like a news hound. And I think to sort of step back and reframe this through the lens of what is our audience looking for, how can we best serve them, has sort of flipped the media paradigm for us on its head and has been supremely rewarding.
Yeah. And I know that, you have that background, Amanda, in audience engagement and really, listening to your audience, both of you really. What have you been hearing from your audience about the types of content they want to see more of?
Well, they want to see content that reflects them first and foremost. And that's, we ask Annalise, I'm not going to remember how to say her last name correctly, so I'm not going to do it. But our newsletter editor, Annalise, is terrific. And one of the things she asks for every time you subscribe, she asks why you're subscribing to the 19th. And people, time and time again, they talk about seeing us at Aaron Haynes on MSNBC or seeing us out on social, and just being so appreciative of finally seeing, again, gender and racial equity centered in our headlines. And they're just, hungry for that kind of serious, substantive coverage. I think people are really gravitating toward the tremendous reporting of Kate Sosin, who is covering the LGBTQ community for us in a way that I don't think other mainstream outlets are doing with regard to politics and policy. With our events, we get a lot of really great feedback just in terms of, again, substantive conversations that are centering women and women of color and the LGBTQ community, and frankly, conversations and coverage that make people and maybe the status quo, that really challenge the status quo and make people uncomfortable, that we're willing to kind of sit with that. And so I think, people are hungry for that coverage. Emily, what am I missing?
Just that I love every time I go on social media and I see like a young Black woman saying, I have never seen myself or my experiences or my family represented like this before in a legacy media publication. I find that kind of feedback to be so rewarding and so empowering because it means that we are doing the job.
Yeah, and I think it absolutely makes a big difference when folks have, the identities that we share, when we're not portrayed in a way that otherizes us, in a way that humanizes us. And I think that's really missing right now. And I'd love to see more of that. Speaking of, otherizing certain folks in our audiences, I'm curious to get your take. I was thinking about this a lot as I prepped for this interview. When we talk about female leadership, even the way that we talk about female leadership is very gendered. I mean, we hear words like CEO and girl boss. Those are very prevalent. It's also really common to ask women about their experiences as female fill in the blank, journalists, engineers, anything like that. But in contrast, we don't really say he-EO or boy boss to talk about men, and we don't really ask them about their experiences as male journalists as often. When do you think society will stop feeling this need to otherize women in this way? What has to happen for us to get there?
I think we need to be equitably represented at the highest ranks of sort of leadership and entrepreneurship. I mean, we still are others because we're so underrepresented. I mean, if you look at who's writing the national narrative, right? Like 70% plus of politics and policy reporters and editors are men. They're almost all white men. So they're the ones deciding what's news and what isn't, whether the story plays on the homepage or the front page, who's quoted in those stories. I mean, if you compare the 19th coverage to some of those news organizations, virtually everyone we quote is someone from an underrepresented background. And I think, you see it with Kamala Harris's leadership too. It's how do we normalize women's leadership? How do we normalize the leadership of women of color and underrepresented people? And it's by leveling the playing field and sort of rewriting who gets to tell our nation's stories. Yeah. Amanda, what didn't I say there?
Yeah, I think that the second piece of that's really super important, because yes, it's getting better representation in positions of leadership. It's having, women like you leading and asking the questions. I won't rest until the 19th is moderating a presidential debate. But I also think it's not just about the icing on top, so to speak. It's about the culture of the entire company, of an organization, of a system that makes it more hospitable for women and women of color to operate. And one of the things that we learned, for instance, by virtue of this remote, we pulled our team together just in time to get up and off the ground for last August. That means that we hired the majority, actually all of the people that we hired last year, we hired in the middle of a pandemic. We were working 100% remote. That meant having people all over the country, people with dogs and partners and kids, trying to figure out how to do their part to get our startup launched. That meant we had to be really flexible and empathetic and supportive of a team that had a lot of different needs. I think about how that translates with regard to people's identities and lived experiences, and being willing to kind of be open and vulnerable to questions about our leadership even. That's been another lesson for us that we're going to continue to be learning about as we grow this organization. So it's not just about hiring or placing, a diverse roster of folks in the right places. It's about keeping them and supporting them and making sure that they feel that, your organization is a place that they can grow and impact and shape the trajectory of the organization. I think that makes a big difference. It's not just about who you hire and place in positions, and how you enable them to shape the trajectory of the work.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting that you've, throughout this event, you've brought up this idea of, it's not just the icing, like you said, it's everyone within an organization. And I know that so many media organizations are struggling to retain a diverse workforce. Recruiting is one thing, retention is another. In your experience leading a big news organization, what are some of those strategies that have helped you retain folks of color, for example, or retain a diverse workforce? And what are some of those strategies that we could learn from you?
Emily can talk about our unparalleled benefits. We're really trying to make it impossible to pick anything other than the 19th.
That's true. That's where I'll start. I mean, I think, look, the reason I believe that the reason more women and women of color in particular don't advance to the highest levels of newsroom leadership is that we make it really difficult in those years where you're navigating both children and, aging parents and trying to care for your family. And so we're one of the few, if only, newsrooms in the country that offers things like 6 months of fully paid family leave, 4 months of fully paid caregiver leave, so that you can take care of your mom or dad or your aunt if you need to. We offered the parents on our team caregiving stipends during the COVID pandemic in order to help us get to launch. We pay for 100% of our employees' healthcare premiums. I mean, I think that the goal for us, 4 weeks of PTO from the moment you walk in the door, not something that has to be earned. And so for us, I think it's about trying to provide the kind of infrastructure around our employees that makes them feel like they're a part of a family and that they're well taken care of.
Yeah. And then I think the other really important piece of that, again, when people ask me when they're applying for jobs at the 19th about the culture, I definitely talk about all the fun things and how we communicate and how we work together. But I also talk about the fact that we are a culture that's open to tough conversations, because we feel like that's an integral ingredient and for being able to do the work that we do, to be able to tackle the journalism in the way that we need to be the kind of organization that is, just prioritizing equity as a value means being open to tough conversations and the tensions that come from building an intersectional organization. And so, that's part of it. And that's a constant work in progress for Emily and I, and the entire organization is learning together and trying to create the right, particularly challenging, again, in an all remote environment, like to create a really safe, constructive place for us to wrestle with some of those issues. But as a leader, being determined not to avoid them. I think that's probably what happens all too often in news organizations. Like the first sign of discomfort and news leaders want to shut it down and say, get back to work. And I think we need to acknowledge, particularly in this moment of racial reckoning and so much loss of life, of livelihood, that's simply not acceptable, that people need to be seen for their entire selves, and that means treating them with dignity and humanity. And that requires much more of us than just punching through a checklist every day. It means taking care of people.
Yeah, and I think those benefits are huge, especially for those of us who didn't come from generational wealth. I've definitely noticed that in my own career as a journalist. A lot of folks end up leaving because they simply can't afford to stay. So it's really interesting the way that you're approaching that. And I wish more newsrooms would think about doing things like that too.
We'll be back with more after this.
Dreaming of a long-awaited vacation? Take your travels to the next level with Alaska Airlines. They're committed to providing a higher standard of safety and cleanliness throughout your journey. From mask requirements and touch-free options to HEPA filters on board and fresh air every 2 to 3 minutes. Plus, their award-winning loyalty program, Mileage Plan, makes it easy to earn and redeem miles wherever you go, including destinations worldwide, thanks to their One World Alliance membership. If you're ready to land a low fare, next-level care, and the best experience in the air, book now at alaskaair.com.
I want to switch gears here and talk about your experiences as media entrepreneurs. I think that there's this belief that in order to be a successful media entrepreneur and launch, a newsroom as big as the 19th, you need to have a lot of money to lead a venture like that, which can be a big barrier for a lot of women and folks of color. I've spoken to folks who think that they assume that you need to have a business background, a lot of VC funding, or just come from a really wealthy family to have a successful launch. Was that the case for you?
No, for neither of us. I mean, I will talk about the privilege that has allowed us to raise money, but I will say from the get-go, I mean, we started the 19th effectively with one person giving us $25,000. And that was $25,000 to travel the country trying to raise the $2 million we believed we needed to really make a go at this. And so everything, this is an entity that has now raised more than $12 million. It has been, I think by all stretches of the imagination, way more successful than I think either of us imagined in pretty short order, because so many people believed in the mission. But that all started, again, with $25,000, which was more money than I had ever raised before. So look, I really don't like the girl boss term, and I do not think either Amanda nor I qualify for that term, which I think is just key in general. But I do think the privilege that I had grown up with allowed me to feel comfortable in the rooms where we were making those big asks. And that's not something that to be scoffed at. That's an important part of this equation. At the same time, this has resonated across the board, not just with major donors, but with small dollar donors who are giving us $19 a year or $19 a month. We're in the middle of our spring member drive right now. And Amanda had this vision for a newsroom that was powered by members. And I think we hoped we'd have something like 1,000 members in our first year. And instead we had 10,000 plus paying members, if I have that right, Amanda. But it's just, that's been magical, is the combination of major philanthropists who thought this was worthy of their investment, and also people for whom $19 is a big deal.
I also want to just say something that I have learned. Emily and I come from different backgrounds too. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. I don't come from generational wealth. I come from a very multicultural family, and I'm not the one asking for money because I'm not good at that, but I've learned a lot along the way. And two of the things in particular is that women, I think, do themselves a disservice when they don't articulate their hopes and dreams. I think sometimes we psych ourselves out of even saying these things out loud. And I think that the reason that we're here today is because Emily was brave enough to say the thing out loud to me, and to keep doing that until we got to a place where it was tangible, rooting each other on and encouraging each other. And the second thing I think is just not being, even though I came from a place where I may not be as comfortable in all of those rooms, for me, learning to buck up and make the ask anyway, because there's money to be had. And I think that there are a lot of really interesting projects right now that I hope that all of you will look into and donate to. Mitra Kalita is launching Epicenter New York and URL Media to really try to elevate the stories of people of color there in New York and across the country. Lauren Williams and Akoto Oforiata are launching Capital B, another nonprofit newsroom that's centering Black voices. And there's just so much really good work. Prism, Fuller Project, so many great projects that are really trying to expand what is offered to an American public that's hungry for more representative journalism. And any way that you can throw a dime their way, please do. We need to be investing in journalism like this. It doesn't always fall, money doesn't come falling from trees or whatever, but I do think that the bottom up, donations make a big difference too. So anyway, just putting that out there.
Well, I love that, you pitched yourself even on here. And I think that's something that's really hard for a lot of people, especially women and folks of color, to do. What tips do you have for folks who are really struggling to build that confidence to make those big asks, whether it's VC funding or negotiating their pay? Sometimes it's really hard to just build up the confidence in the first place. What advice do you have for folks who struggle with that?
Mine is silly, but I think it has not failed me yet. And that is that I remember when I was negotiating when I got my first salary offer, my mom said to me, you always ask for more because the worst thing they can say is no. And that's not such a bad thing for them to say. And that sounds so silly and basic, but it really works. It has worked, on the negotiation front. It has worked on the fundraising stuff. As Amanda said, it's just about getting the guts to say, you know what, the number I need is not $10,000 to make a go at this. It's $100,000 to make a go at this. Or in the, craziest world, it's not $100,000. It's $1 million that it's really going to take to build this, this brand new venture. And having the the confidence in your mission, but also just it's never going to feel good and comfortable. I ask for money about 80% of the day, and it still makes me feel queasy literally every time I do it. My hands sweat, my knees shake. Like it's, but it's for the audience and it's for the mission. It's not about me. And I think you're giving them an opportunity, and that's to invest in something really special. And that's what I have to keep reminding myself.
Yeah, I think that translates actually down to the personal or individual level as well. I think the two tips that I would give, one is if someone asks you your salary, you are not obliged to give them that information. And when you do give them a number, it should be what you're worth and what you need, not what you made before. It's none of their business. And the second thing is to really feel confident in what that number is do the homework. Go and do the research. What are the comparable roles? So if for an organization like us, we did the homework to figure out here's what it's really going to take to get this done, so that when people asked, we could say, well, your investment is going to help us do X, Y, and Z. Same thing applies on a personal level. Like, here are my skills. Here's what I bring to the table. Here's what it's worth. Here's what it's going to cost you. Here's what I'm going to require in order to succeed, for you to do the job that you need me to do. So that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. I hope all of us are taking notes as we prepare to make our big asks.
It's worth a lot more than 2 cents.
All right, we are moving towards the end of our session, but I have one last question for you. I know that the 19th came out of the gate with a lot of momentum. In fact, the first time I had heard of the 19th, it had to do with the announcement about Meghan Markle being involved in the 2020 summit. You also had big speakers like Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris. How do you keep that momentum going, and what's next for the 19th?
We're so tired.
I bet you're exhausted.
I'm going on my first vacation in about 2 weeks. My first vacation in like 18 months. So that's hopefully how, but I don't know, Amanda.
We have another big annual summit, our second annual. So we had our inaugural summit in August. We're having our second annual summit this coming August. We're going to have more really, not just big names, but really meaningful conversations. We're going to be digging into a day of talking about gender equity in sports, which I think is so relevant right now. As you look at what's rolling across state legislatures around the country, and just our entire staff is like obsessed with sports and gender. Well, almost our entire staff. I'm going to start there's going to be a Slack battle about that statement. So the summit is something that we're really excited about. We're excited to take our journalism into podcasting in the next year. That's a big, exciting thing for us. I don't know what else is on the horizon. And we're still hiring. We have so many jobs that we're filling right now.
I mean, nearly doubling the size of our newsroom over the next several months. Yeah. So much more great journalism to come.
Wow. Well, sounds like you are running a marathon. I do not envy the position you're in, but have a lot of admiration for you. All right. Well, thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. And for all of you watching, you can learn more about the 19th at 19thnews.org. Amanda and Emily, thank you again for spending time with us.
Thank you, Starla. Great to be here.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks to Starla, Emily, and Amanda for the talk. And thanks also to the folks in the audience who asked questions. If you'd like to be one of those audience members for a future Crosscut event, go to crosscut.com/events. This episode of Crosscut Talks was engineered by Seth Halloran. The live recording was engineered by Rusty Bacall and Victoria Ralph, and the event was produced by Jake Newman and Andrea O'Meara. Ann Chris Novich and Mo Cloud managed our audience engagement. If you'd like to subscribe to Crosscut Talks, you can do just that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit crosscut.com. And if you would like to support the work that we do at Crosscut, whether it's the live events we host every month or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to crosscut.com/donate. Crosscut Talks is a product of Cascade Public Media. I'm Mark Baumgarten. We'll be back soon with another conversation.